Well, hey everyone, welcome to Photo Show Live, the first episode of the live series. Of course, my fantastic guest today is Rich Joseph Facun, and I'll start by giving you a little bio. But the way this is going to work is, the first part of the show will be like a podcast, a visual podcast, and Rich is going to tell us about himself and how he got started, a little background information. We'll have a little back and forth. Then Rich will show some work, and then we can take questions from the audience. So, hi, Rich. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So let me read a little bit of your bio.
Okay.
It's a good long one, so I might abbreviate here and there.
Please do. There's too many fancy words. And
Yeah. Rich Joseph Facun is a photographer of Indigenous Mexican and Filipino descent. His work aims to offer an authentic look into endangered, bygone, and fringe cultures, those transitions in time where places fade, but people persist. The exploration of place, community, and cultural identity present themselves as a common denominator in both his life and photographic endeavors. Before finding home in the Appalachian Foothills of Southeast Ohio, Rich roamed the globe for 15 years working as a photojournalist. During that time, he was sent on assignment to over a dozen countries, and for 3 of those years, he was based in the United Arab Emirates. His photography has been commissioned by various publications, including NPR, The Atlantic, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, ProPublica, and on and on and on. You can read the rest of those on his website. Additionally, Rich's work has been recognized by Photolucida's Critical Mass, CNN, Juxtapoz, British Journal, Washington Post, and that goes on a little bit. In 2021, his first monograph, Black Diamonds, was released. Here it is, by Fall Line Press. The work is a visual exploration of the former coal mining boom towns of Southeast Ohio, Appalachia. Subsequently, it was highlighted by Charcoal Book Club. Charcoal Book Club is sponsor of the show as their book of the month. Black Diamonds is also part of the permanent collection at the Frederick and Kazuko Harris Fine Arts Library and the Amon Carter Museum of American Arts Research Library. And Rich is going to show that work, but also presently Rich is in the process of producing his next monograph, Little Cities, which is a kind of a sister book, and we'll get into that for Black Diamonds. That should be out this fall by Little Oak Press, and I haven't seen it yet, and so I'll be seeing it for the first time with all of you tonight. And so yeah, Rich, hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah. So why don't we start with a little bit of how you got into all of this?
Into photography?
Photography, ending up in Ohio. I know it's quite a journey.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a roundabout way, but I mean, really it kind of started with skateboarding, just wanting to document my friends with a little point and shoot camera. And then that kind of trailed off, and I forgot about skateboarding for a while because, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking before the show started, I had a child when I was pretty much a child as well. So I was about 17 and I had to put my board away for a while, and anything else that was interesting, trying to figure out a way to take care of my child, my family. And then much later, I think in my late 20s, I was 28 or somewhere around there, I accidentally I ended up taking a photography class at a community college in Virginia. I needed a fine art credit, and I originally had signed up for sculpture because I was doing tree work at the time, and I figured I could get free logs that I could use for materials to make things out of. And I was putting myself through school, so I said, this is no brainer. But then the class got canceled, and the lady was like, well, we've got photography, and I was like, I don't want to do photography, and I did. I mean, I had an interest in photography, but I just didn't want to do it because I knew I'd have to pay for chemicals and paper and all the other stuff that comes along with analog photography. And and she just was basically take it or leave it. So I took the course and ended up really just kind of got the bug and fell in love with photography again, but really wasn't certain what to do with it. And I was very fortunate that at the time, Vimy Edom Smith, who's actually the child of Vi and Clifton Edom, and they're the ones who started the Missouri photo workshop many years ago. So she happened to live in the area I was at, and she put on a workshop called Truth with a Camera. And at that time, it had to have been dirt cheap because I was pretty broke, and I think it was like maybe $50 or something. They're 10 for a week-long workshop, and Bill Epridge was there. And
Bill Epridge is a well-known photojournalist, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was a legend at the time. I was clueless. Carol Guzzi was there. There was like a lot, and some other folks, and I really didn't have a clue who they were or the magnitude of their work. But towards the end of the workshop, they're like, what are you going to do with all this? And they're like, I don't know. And so we pursue a degree, and so you can make a living doing this. so they were like, yeah. So because I was originally majoring a double major in philosophy and religious studies. But
well, that's a career path too. Sure.
Yeah, right. No, I was gonna do that and potentially get my judicial degree and go into law or pursue philosophy a little bit longer and then teach at a university level. But then photography kind of got in the way of all that. And so I fell in love with photography, and they started talking to me about different programs around the country for photojournalism. I didn't really even know what photojournalism meant, but it sounded good. I didn't know there was a difference between photojournalism and fine art photography and all the different genres. I just thought photography was photography. So I ended up enrolling at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, and into their visual communications program with the concentration in photojournalism or visual communications, and just jumped in at full force and started taking pictures and working for newspapers. And that's kind of what brought me into photography and kept me around for a while. And then I kind of jumped all over the place from there.
Were you pretty much situated in Ohio by then, or were you just thinking I'm going to go wherever work is at that point?
I mean, you mean like when I graduated from?
Yeah, I mean you were in photojournalism at that point, right? When you graduated Ohio?
Yeah, I had done, I think at that point, I think I had done three internships while I was an undergrad, and then ended up moving out to New Mexico, and I was working in Gallup for a very short stint. And then I went back to Virginia and I freelanced for the Virginian Pilot, which was my hometown paper, but at the time it was a really great visual paper. It was known for its use of photography. So I got to learn a lot from the people there. And then what happened? Oh, then I stopped taking pictures. I moved out to Arizona and I stopped making pictures for about a year or so.
Why was that?
I just couldn't figure out my way. I couldn't figure out how to make it work. I couldn't figure out how to make a living from it. Things just weren't lining up. And
it was a lot of freelance work up until that point.
Yeah.
Nothing steady. Yeah.
Nothing steady. And I was making more money before I went to college doing blue collar work than I was when I got out of college. And now I have the student loan too. So there's a lot of frustration. Especially at that point, I think I was maybe 30 or close to 30. And had my child already, and I was just kind of, man, why did I go to school? Now I'm making less than I did when I was working before I had a degree. So, but I was really fortunate because I ended up in Tucson, Arizona, and a mentor of mine that was originally at the Virginian Pilot had made his way to becoming a director of photography in Tucson, the Tucson paper, and I didn't even know he was there. He didn't know I was there. But I had talked to an old colleague, and she had mentioned, "Hey, have you talked to Victor?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well, he's the DOP in the paper in Tucson." I was like, "You sure it's not Phoenix?" And she was like, "No, it's Tucson." So I called him up. And I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And one thing led to another, and he asked me kind of what I've been up to, and I said, "Oh, I've been working on some projects," and I didn't want to tell him I hadn't been shooting. And so I just said I had some projects I've been working on, and he said, "Well, let's go to dinner and you can share your work with me when we go out." So I did have a project that he hadn't seen since we had last talked. So I brought that, and we got to talking, and then he created a freelance budget to get me back. He didn't know I hadn't been shooting, but basically created a freelance budget so that I could come do some work for him. And that led into like an internship. And then I left there and got like my first real staff position as a photo editor in his paper outside in the suburbs of Chicago.
Yeah. And what leads you to the United Arab Emirates then?
So I was hanging out. Well, this was 2008, early 2008 or mid 2008, and my wife had been watching the economy, U.S. economy, and she was concerned about it. She kept telling me that the economy was going to tank and that the US was in trouble and that we should move abroad and leave the States. And
She wasn't wrong.
no, she wasn't. But I entertained the idea. I was like, okay, yeah, sure, let's talk about it. And, but not full-fledged, like committed, And so we were looking at different places and different countries. And then I noticed that my friend had just moved to Abu Dhabi for a position at the paper there. And I noticed that there was an opening at the paper he was at. And so I think I either called or messaged or texted him. Somehow I reached out to him and I was like, hey, what's going on? I was like, is this your job or did something not work out? Are you okay? Is everything fine? And he's like, oh, no, they're hiring. You should reach out to the director and let them know I sent you, but you missed the deadline because they're a day ahead. And he said, but just reach out to him anyway and just tell him mention my name or whatever. And he told me kind of like the deal with benefits and pay and things. And I got off the phone and my wife was like, what'd he say? And I was like, oh, he said I should apply and that they probably, they pay us this, and these are the benefits. Cause they had crazy benefits. Like I think you got a $3,000 or $5,000 furniture allowance every year, something crazy like that. But and just other random bells and whistles that were amazing. So
oil money.
Yes. They had a car they gave me and I never paid for gas. They paid for all my gas, personal and business use. It was insane. But so I got off the phone and she's like, are you going to apply? And I was like, no. What are you talking about? I was like, I'm good. I'm happy where I'm at. And she goes, no, you should apply. I was like, fine. So I like copied and pasted my bio and just made that my cover letter and sent a link to it. Was like a half effort, but because it was, nothing. I wouldn't do that now, but it's just one of those things. And so I sent it out and ended up getting call back, and they offered me the position. And one thing led to another, and my wife was just like, hey man, like when's the next time you'll get an opportunity to live abroad and experience a different culture and have the relocation paid and get offered a really nice salary? And I said, that's fine. Let's do it. So
what kind of work was it?
I was a staff photographer for it's a newspaper called The National. It was owned at the time, it was owned by the Crown Prince of the UAE, but since that time I believe it's been bought by a different media conglomerate.
Yeah. And in terms of editorial freedom, things like that, was there any difference? Did you?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a difference.
Yeah,
there's definitely a difference than working in the States for a journalist or newspaper. A few of them, so I'll highlight those. One was that you really couldn't report in a negative light or tone about things that were happening within the UAE. Things as minor as like a concert, like they didn't want you to give like poor concert reviews. And then when that particular newsroom was built up of journalists from the UK, Europe, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and a very small percentage from the US. So you have all these different people coming together with different philosophies and theories of how journalism should be approached. And, I'm not going to point fingers at anything, but definitely like there were some clashes with me and like as far as ethics and morals and how I was trained to treat journalism as opposed to how others were from different places in the world. So that was slightly challenging, things like that as far as, and then, like there's a lot of the laborers that come there from mostly from Southeast Asia. They typically are living in labor camps. That's the term they call them. They're called labor camps. And they're usually out in the middle of nowhere of the desert, and it's all these men in kind of mediocre conditions. And so I had been working on a project on documenting these men and their lives there, but that quickly was squashed as far as like ever seeing the light of day. But so things like that. So there was a variance of the what you could actually report on and to what degree.
How long were you there then?
3 years exactly. To the
3.
day.
Okay. Yeah. And was it a kind of, okay, that's enough time to go back to the States, or, did the work dry up?
No, the work was always there. It's just, and in fact, it was nice because I ended up connecting with stock agency as well as a commercial agency. So I was getting work doing stock photography as well as commercial work. So that was, that they were based out of Dubai. So that was a really great opportunity. So I was making more money than I ever made in my life in photography. But I think one of the biggest things was like my son, more so my son, not so much my daughter, because my daughter was, I think, less than a year old. Was getting too accustomed to growing up with grown men and women waiting on him hand and foot. And I didn't grow up that way, and not, that's not the way I want to raise my children. Was that storm here? Or is that
Hey, there you are. Welcome back.
I think the Wi-Fi just died on that one, and I'm going to yeah. So I don't even know where we're at. I just heard a big
we do because we all talked about it. The last thing you said, you didn't. Yeah, I was asking you about coming back from UAE, and you said you didn't want your kids to be raised in a way where people were waiting on them hand and foot.
Yeah, that was part of it for sure. I saw my sons getting a little too comfortable lounging by the pool, having grown men bringing fresh juice and handmade pizza. I was just like,
And do your kids remember this? And
my son does.
And are they still mad at you?
No, he actually loves it here as well.
Yeah.
But the other thing too, though, is I felt like as far as like cultural or identity based upon the country you're from, I felt like there was a possibility that both of them would not be able to like really identify with, where maybe they are American citizens, but wouldn't necessarily have the same cultural identity that Americans that grow up in the US have. That being said, of course, there's certainly plenty of wonderful things about not just the UAE, but other countries and cultures that we could certainly benefit from as Americans, to take on and adopt some of those beliefs and practices. But in general, like, I just felt like I wanted my children to grow up back in the States.
I don't want to go too far back, but just to mention, I mean, your father was in the Navy. Your father, forgive me, I forget which side of your family is which. Your father.
My father's from the Philippines, and my mother.
Okay.
Yeah.
But your father immigrated to the U.S., joined the Navy.
Yes.
And you kind of grew up moving around. Do you think that's part of the ease at which you were able to just sort of jump around and move around and try new places?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I always loved moving around, and when my dad was active military, I really enjoyed finding out like where he would be stationed next. We would move every 3 to 4 years with him in the military, and I always was excited about it. The only time I was disappointed was the last movie we made we were based in Meridian, Mississippi, and we had the opportunity to go to Guam or Alaska or back to Norfolk, Virginia. And I really wanted to go to Guam or Alaska. Alaska was my second choice. And my mom and dad both really enjoyed their time in Virginia previously. So they decided that we were going to go back to Virginia, and I was really disappointed. But on the flip side, my son's not like that. He didn't enjoy the constant moves and things like that. We started to see that, that it was becoming having a negative effect on him at some point. And that's when we ended up moving somewhere where we would be permanently based, and he could build some longer, meaningful relationships with friends.
All right. So why don't we jump ahead a little bit into then how you end up settling in Ohio and really exploring your neighbors.
Okay. So we were coming back we were on a cross-country road trip, and we ended up visiting Flagstaff, Arizona, which is where my wife's father lived at the time. And we really enjoyed the mountains and the recreational sports and just the outdoor life there. And so we got to talking. We were like, my wife grew up in LA. She's like, I don't want our kids to grow up in the South. At the time, we were living in Virginia. And I said, okay. And so when we got back to Virginia, we started looking for a change in my career path, because my wife had been a stay-at-home mom up until that point. So we were just looking for something for me that would be a good fit. And also at the same time, the journalism industry was really taking a hard hit, and things weren't as stable as they used to be. And I don't know that they ever were, but uh, they seemed like they were just slipping. Like felt like I was on a sinking ship. So I said, well, what can we go to next? And we ended up narrowing it down to getting into working with universities, and a position opened up here at Ohio University, and it seemed like a really good fit for me. And I applied and ended up getting offered the role, and we moved out here because part of it is we wanted to be, like I said before, somewhere that was in the mountains. Here we're in the foothills, but that was good enough. And the land is very affordable here. And the other thing that was important for myself as well as my wife is that we lived in a community that embraced like diversity and inclusion amid many other open-minded ways of thinking.
What was the job?
At the time, I was a photographic resources supervisor for the Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine. That's a med school that's here in Ohio University. But since then, I've moved over to a role working in the communications and marketing for the entire university, not just the college, the medical college.
Oh, okay. And that's what you're doing now?
Yeah, I do that, but I also work for Yafi Press.
Yes.
And then I also do a bunch of like contract photography, contract photographer. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Do you still do editorial work?
Yeah, I do. I just came back from New York working for ProPublica and had a really wonderful shoot there. This one's been pretty good. It was like ProPublica, AARP, somebody else I can't remember right now, but but yeah, it's been good, and it's been fortunate, because a lot of I'm getting to that point where editors are calling and hoping for me to do work for them that's similar to the type of work that I kind of been shifting towards with my series that I've been doing in Ohio since I moved here.
What are you doing at Yafe Press?
A little bit of everything. The biggest thing I do is help. I help the photographers raise their funds for their books.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You just finished.
I did just finish raising mine.
Yeah.
I did. Oh,
congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. And anyone here who gave, thank you, I guess, right?
Yes, for sure. Anyone who gave, thank you very much. It was a nail biter, but definitely challenging. And it was the first campaign I did that funded Black Diamonds. The money was raised within 2 weeks. So it was a really quick and fast. The second one, this were Little Cities, took a lot longer, and it drug on for such a long time. It was pulling my hair out. But I think that's kind of good in a way, because now working with Yafi, it's like it gives me the opportunity when I do work with different artists that if they're having a more challenging time meeting their goals for their funding, at least I've been there and have a better sense of like where I can pull from that and share that experience with them and kind of say, okay, and bring the nerves back down to earth and kind of help us focus and like reach our goals. So I do that, and then I also do all the press outreach for all the artist books that come out. And then Jennifer Yafi does have a podcast that she's taking a break from.
Yes.
So I do help do with the research on that. So that's been fun. The only thing I don't like about that is that doing all the research and helping with the editing and stuff, it spoils it, because then I've already heard everything and read everything, and it's not as fun to listen to the final product. I
never thought of that, because obviously I edit my own. I also edit for Sasha Wolf.
Yeah.
And I never really thought of it like that. I kind of like the like seeing the whole thing, getting the whole thing, and I don't, as an editor, you get to also shape it a little bit, right?
I mean, I don't edit it to the degree like what you're doing. I edit in the sense of like I'm pulling articles and reading through them and highlighting and saying, this might be a point of interest and things like that. Jennifer works all the magic on that end of the thing. She's pretty amazing in that sense. She's just one day was like, I'm going to do a podcast, and she just killed it. So
yeah.
But so I was helping with that, but that's kind of been on the back burner a little bit because we've got a ton of books coming out this year. And then also, I keep an eye out for any potential talent that I think would be a book of interest for her to pick up.
Nice.
Yeah, so I get a little bit of everything, really, like I said. So it's been fun to meet new artists and look at like a lot of different work that I normally wouldn't be informed about, and also just kind of get more insight about how the industry works
Oh,
and
you
how to
dropped
make
out a
things
little bit
happen.
there. How the industry works and
Oh, and just how you make things can make things happen for yourself and for others.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I know. So you're having a little bit of a storm there. Do your light, are your lights blinking a little bit?
They are blinking a little bit. I'm just like,
All right. We're
you
just going to
know,
prepare in case you go again.
where's
Right.
my candles and like, I
Well, why
thought
don't
I
we, before we run out of electricity and time, um, I think we should move into you showing some work, and I just want to preface it with some questions and all. You you moved to Ohio. You're part of this community that's within Appalachia, right?
Mhm.
And you're 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 doing this work, which is very documentary in style, and so the roots of photojournalism are there as well,
Yes.
right? You're a documentary worker here, and
Yep.
um, but what happens is as you're doing this work, the country is going through a bit of a change, a bit of turmoil with Black Lives Matter, and the politics are going off the charts, and you know, um, and as you're doing this work, that starts to creep into your mind about what's happening in a way that, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, where I see this parallel course that you're running where you're starting to think about your identity and your background and how there are labels and misunderstandings and the way you are visible within a community. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the way you're trying to show the people around you, show your neighbors, show your community. In finding your place in that community, you're also kind of exposing what are the misunderstandings or what are the cultural misunderstandings with the people in Appalachia, which is very much embedded in this wonderful epilogue written by Alison Stein,
Yeah.
great writer.
Amazing.
It's a kind of love letter, right,
Yes,
to the people of
most definitely.
Appalachia. Yeah, and everyone should pick up the book and read that. Um, but there's this great affection in the writing, and also a defense of the community in the writing.
Yes.
And so you do Black Diamonds, and Little Cities isn't really separate work. It's sort of another way to look at the community through more
Yes.
landscape as opposed to portraiture in some way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And it's
And
also looking at our effects of how we as a not necessarily ideally it will transcend just this community, but it'll be looking at how
right.
we treat the landscape and what we've done with it throughout the years and through history.
Yeah, or a great interest of mine personally. But yes, so why don't we then now move into the show and tell part of the show?
Okay. So this is the cover of my first monograph, Black Diamonds, which was put out by Fall Line Press in 2021. I think less than a year ago, maybe it was. And I'll just talk about this just briefly. In regards to the cover, it was essentially a topographic map. It was a vintage map that I found of one of the coal mining boom towns here that I documented. This is called Corning, and much of the rivers are polluted now with acid mine drainage. So the river here is kind of like a reddish color. And it works kind of two ways, because the cover also looks like it could be an artery, but at the same time, it's also the land here and with the rivers that have been damaged by the acid mine drainage. So I kind of like how it works on multiple levels. And so the next book, Little Cities, which I'll show later, that also contains a map. And then, not to jump too far ahead, but I have a third book that I'm working on, and ideally will carry that same theme through. So each book will have a map of significance on the cover. Oh, and I should mention, like, Black Diamonds basically is a reference to the people here. Little Cities of Black Diamonds basically is a term that some locals use for these different towns here in Little Cities. So they call it the Little Cities of Black Diamonds. And they're all the former coal mining boom towns that popped up here in this region during that era. So the first book is Black Diamonds, and the second one is Little Cities, and those titles are borrowed from this term of affection. And the first image I'm sharing with you is, this is actually shot from my porch on outside my living room. When we moved here, we ended up, as we talked about, ended up buying some land and moved out to the country. But not only is it my home here in this photograph, but I also wanted to express that, it's much of the land, like not that long ago, was essentially timber, like it was harvested for all the timber. So everything was logged and all you could see was the land. There was no deer, there were no very little creatures. And when I say no deer, I got to emphasize that because now the deer are just run like everywhere. I mean, they're in town in Athens, they're out in Milford Ryan. You can see them in people's yards, you can see them walking down the street. It's like they're just hanging out, waiting to make friends with us. So so to imagine this area now like that, but at a time when there was no deer is kind of interesting. But the other thing about this photograph is like because of all the harvesting of the forest, most of our trees here are just like very early young growth.
Rich, did you move to the next page?
There's this here in a picture. Yeah.
No, we're still seeing the cover.
Oh, yeah, I'm out of full
There
screen.
we go. Okay, stay out of full screen.
I'm just gonna leave it like that.
Yeah.
You guys are awesome. Thanks for sticking around. The next act's gonna be great.
That's right.
So yeah, these are basically like early growth trees. You don't have a lot of old growth here, very little. Like you might see one random tree that was left, but most of them are very young trees, like these persimmon trees here that were growing in my backyard. And this will bring us to this portrait of Eric. And this is actually what started the whole project of Black Diamonds. I was coming out of a doctor's office and we kind of passed each other and said hello. I can't remember. I think it was a nonverbal hello, just like the body language. But when I got to my truck, I was like, oh man, I had just bought this new camera and it was with the intent to start making photographs again, because I was starting to see pictures again, because I hadn't really done any personal work for about 2 years. Intentionally, I just wanted to take a break. And when I saw him, I was like, man, come on, like, your camera's right there, he's right there, like, you just got to do this. And I went back and forth. It was, that conversation I think a lot of us have in our heads when we're out doing street portraiture and things. And so thankfully I got up, got the courage, knocked on his window. He hopped out, gave me my pitch, which I don't really know what it was because I didn't know what I was doing. I just kind of wanted to start making portraits. And he obliged and I made his portrait, and he started to like have tears coming down, and I didn't stop to ask him why, because I didn't want to ruin the moment. I just made his picture, and then I was like, oh, I think I got what I need. And then he started to run off to his car because it was kind of cold out. I believe it was in January 7th or something. And I ran after him, was like, hold on, let me get your name and all this stuff. And just thanked him for his time, and never asked him like what the story was. I really just wanted it to be more ambiguous and leave it open for interpretation. And I've tried to reach out to him a few times, and he's actually reached out to me through social media, because I want to get him a book, get him a copy of his book. But like, I'll message him, and then he'll reply like one answer, and then like maybe 2 months later he'll get back to me, and then I'll ask him again, and then another 2 months passes. So Eric, if you're out there, I really would like to get you a book. And then in this particular image is it's an old, one of the last, if not the last, coal mining company townhouse or townhome in this little town called Renville. And this is actually going to become a museum from what I heard. But since that time, I really just, the boxes and the flag and wallpaper just really had resonated with me. I'm really fascinated with interiors of different buildings for numerous reasons. And so this, I felt, told a story that kind of complemented or created like a, like a nice little piece of, like, I look at photography and photo stories and photo essays and narratives. It's like, I compare them just to like writing a regular essay or story. So sometimes I look at pictures as like commas or exclamation points, like give them kind of labels that were grammatical labels I give them. So for me, like, this is kind of like a comma. So that's kind of how it works for me. and this is an older woman who I ended up meeting. And this was one of the wonderful opportunities where an editor had reached out to me. And when we were talking more about the deliverables, I said, what's the approach? What are you hoping to see with this work? And then my instruction was like, basically the instruction she gave me was to approach it the same way that you are doing what you're doing with your Black Diamonds work. And at that time, it wasn't a book yet. And I said, okay. So I went out and was able to make this portrait of this woman, and I was grateful that it was something that could fall into the rest of the project. But I really liked her, and I told her that I'd bring her the article when it ran, and she didn't. I guess she wasn't sure about that, and so I came back when the article ran, and I printed out a copy for her and knocked on her door, and she was really surprised and told me, like, I didn't think you were going to come back. I didn't believe you. I said, well, I said I would. And she goes, well, yeah, you said you would, but I didn't think you really would. I said, well, here I am. And so, but it's just cool to meet like neighbors like this. And this is a lot of the work in Black Diamonds it's just me cruising around, meeting my neighbors. And this is a friend of our family's, it's her mom's property. And I went over there with my kids to let them see the goats and chickens and stuff. And of course, I brought my camera in and made this frame of this goat, and I think it speaks to like just the relationship that within the larger project of the book. Part of it is just to speak to the relationship that many of the people here have with the land, and also with the livestock that they may own. I think that was an important. I still think is an important part of the story to tell of this region. This little street photography. Again, this was like running errands. My son was taking music classes in a town down the road from us called Nelsonville, and just saw these kids hanging out and hopped out of my truck and was fortunate to get this nice moment. So as much of the book, the approach was an attempt to like incorporate portraiture and new topographic work, but also to incorporate street photography, which is something that I really enjoy. And actually before I was into photojournalism, the first photo class I took, most of the work I did, I would consider it street photography. And like Gary Winograd has always been, the man. Always been Gary Winograd, Robert Frank. How can you go wrong? And part of working in Appalachia and within Black Diamonds, it was just, I was very concerned about how I portrayed the people I photographed and the places that I made images of. I felt like there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of images that come out of the region that, yes, they are true to a degree, but I think there's more to it than just poverty and opioid addiction. And I know this is a trailer home, but to me, it still shows pride of ownership. I mean, the lawn is fairly, green and it's tidy around the outside. And yes, it's got age to it, but like clearly someone is like taking care of that property. And I kind of just wanted to give a nod to that. And then again, like sometimes I photograph my neighbors, sometimes my friends. This day I was skateboarding. This is Gary, he's a very close friend of mine, one of my favorite people here that I've met and built a relationship with, and learned a lot from. He's an avid outdoorsman and a carpenter, and just knows a wealth of knowledge about things that I don't know anything about. So it's been great to learn from him. And this particular day, he injured himself, and we were waiting for the ambulance to come. And I made this frame, and I just had to apologize afterwards. But I just had to make it happen. Sorry, Gary. But he's cool with it. This is my neighbor, and this little caravan he's standing in front of, like I had driven by this countless times. I can't even count how many times I've driven past this thing, and even then, before then, that day, and after. And I always wondered like who lived there, or does anyone live there, or like what's the story behind it. And this one specific day, he was standing outside there, outside of his mobile home. That's where he lives, and with his girlfriend. And he waved, and I waved back, and then I was like, it's on. So I like pulled over as quick as I could and like dropped my keys and didn't care, and just like ran over and started talking with him, and he let me make his portrait and told me his story. And since then they've moved upgraded to a better better place. But super stoked to have met him. And again, like I said, since that time and before that time, I still have never seen him outside again. So that was just a little gift from the photo gods. Just a scene setter on the way to work. I was on my way to work and saw this. Originally, it was just a landscape, and then I was standing out in the middle of the road, and then I saw this man on the right, who's like one of the only homeless people in Athens. I mean, I'll take that back. There are other homeless families, but this gentleman was like, had a presence, so people knew he was around. And then so he's walking up one side in the red, and then there's this little man riding his bike up the hill in his Carhartt coveralls, and a car coming up, and I was like, oh man, and the sky is all gorgeous, and the scene felt right, and made some frames and hopped back in my truck and had to get on down the road to work. And I love coming across scenes like this. It was just, I think I was in town just walking around waiting to go pick my son up, because I said a lot of stuff was shot in between running errands and so forth. So I just saw these kids like hanging out on their porch, and I don't know, there's something very wholesome about it. Some Main Street scenes.
You're clearly a person who travels with their camera.
Well, yeah, I mean, during this, when I'm working on stuff like with this project, I was I knew like I was really strapped for time, but I knew I could make images on the fly, because just coming up as a journalist, quite often they would tell you, hey, we need some art for A1, or we need art for this, or some story fell through, whatever. And you had like an hour to go out and make a banger and come back with something that you were proud of. And because your name's in the photo. And I was working in a community where people knew me from when I was in elementary school and up, and I knew people were watching, so I had this accountability. So from that, I like learning the skill set to just make images quickly and make them make sure they have a certain degree of quality to them. So I'm grateful for having learned that skill set working as a photojournalist. So yeah, sometimes like for sure, like quick, got 2 minutes, I just bang something out. But now I'm on break, so I don't really have I don't bring my camera out. I've gotten into the habit of only really kind of carrying it with me when I have an intent to, when I'm working on something. And I've tried to get more in the habit though of like when I'm traveling for an assignment, to leave early, so I have time to pull over and make some frames if I see something that interests me. So that's always been beneficial, like just having that extra time when you're on the road and you see something cool, you can snap that. But those are more like drive-bys, which I don't know what will ever come of anything of this, but they're just nice to have, and they kind of fuel my like I have like an adrenaline rush when I make a great photo, or a photo that I think is great. I get this adrenaline rush, so it feeds my craving at least enough to kind of float me through it. And I'm going to kind of move along some of these pictures because I would like to get to the little city stuff as well. And we'll stop on this one. So one thing I should mention is like my wife is like, I'd consider her, she's like very instrumental in all of my work, because she's always there to listen, and she's very bright. She's a scientist, and she's an artist and an environmentalist, and pretty much excels at whatever she decides she wants to do, which is pretty annoying, but at least she married me, so that's cool. But she gets photography, she gets visual narrations, and she understands art in general. So this particular day I was coming home and she was like, hey, there's a black lung screening mobile clinic in the Walmart parking lot. And I was like, oh man, I was almost home. And I was like, it's like, they're going to tell me no, they're not going to let me get access to this, but I got to try, because it would be a beneficial image to make that's that I think is partially crucial to the work. So I turned around and went back, and sure enough, man, they just met this gentleman here, and he was like, yeah, sure, come on in, you take my picture. And I was just like, I love you.
That is a very community specific thing that was happening. Black lung screening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, when I approached him, actually, he was like, what mine did you work at?
Mm.
And I was like, oh no, sir, I didn't work in a mine, but and then I gave my pitch while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. So then again, this is just like driving somewhere from my house to down the main road. And I saw her dad first, and he had a cane and he was in the woods and he was looking there's a wild plant, and you might be familiar, it's called ramps. That
Sure.
just grow. And so he was like he was looking,
Salads.
yeah. So he was looking for ramps because it was ramp season. And I pulled over and I was like, hey, what's going on? And we got to talking. And then I saw his daughter and another daughter outside. He said, hey, can I go over there and make their portrait? And he goes, well, just make it quick because I don't know when their mom's gonna wake up. I guess the mom would be more likely to allow me to make photographs of their children. And I ended up making this frame, which I really thought was compelling. She was just turning 18 and was talking about what she would like to do when she grew up or when she finished high school. And this is the Cobb house down the street from my house. These boys are not related in any way, shape, or form, believe it or not, but they were amazing. So I had to pull over and make their photograph, and they just made those poses on their own, which I love when things kind of just serendipity just makes things work for you. And you can't go wrong with parades. I love parades. So and that brings me to the Little Cities work, which is basically, like you said earlier, it's kind of like a sister project to Black Diamonds. And in all honesty, it really originally was supposed to just be like a side project or like an EP, if you're talking about, comparing it to music.
B-sides.
Yeah, it was just supposed to be like this little, like, I had been, as I was working on Black Diamonds, I was making images, topographic images that were interesting, but they didn't feel like they fit into what I was trying to do with Black Diamonds. And I actually had made a gallery and set them aside and hid the gallery on my website, and then forgot about the work. Forgot I even had it, that I had even done an edit. And then on another assignment for a client, I started shooting new topographic work, and I got really excited about it. And then I was like, oh man, maybe I should pursue this, and there's something here maybe. But then I don't know what brought me back to my website, but something clicked. I was like, oh wait, you already kind of had something going along these lines. So I went back and found all my files that I'd set aside, and I was like, oh, there's a project right there happening. So I started digging more deep into that, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that transpired in a moment. But I want to talk about the cover here. There's basically, again, like bring old maps. This is an old historic map of the region, and like the little circles are actually the solid circles are Indian mounds, which is what they call them here. The Indian mounds were essentially burial sites and ceremonial sites. And apparently, from what I've read, depending on the size of them, these would be built over a period of 100 years or so. It wasn't like something they just built, overnight. And when you see them, you're kind of like, wow, how did you move that much dirt manually and shape this perfect circle, a perfect cone shape, which you'll see some of the pictures later, and you're kind of like, how did you do that? But that's a whole nother story. And then the open circles are actually earthworks, which are they're more kind of like they kind of are indentions into the ground, almost like for lack of a better word, like a ditch. So it makes these perfect circular ditches. But those came into the kind of the cover was chosen after I developed more of the story. Because the problem, not the problem, but the challenge with with my work for me is that I don't always now I work in a way where I don't go into it with intention like it's going to be about this. It's more that I have a notion or something esoteric that's nudging at me and telling me that there's something there. And then I go and play and make photographs and work on that for however long. There's no magic timeline. And then I throw down some work prints and start seeing kind of what rises to the top and where these common themes are flowing from. And then at that point, I can determine like, oh, I can see kind of it's going in this direction, but you're missing, these words, or you're missing, and again, sorry, it's a reference back, and it's not, when I say words, I mean, it's like you're missing these photographs, or you're missing this part of the story. So then I can kind of regroup and like focus it and hone in on kind of where I think the project is taking me. I really like the freedom now of not working as a journalist, in the sense that I don't have to go in with intent of what I'm trying to illustrate or what story I'm trying to tell. I can really just let the story unfold and let it take me wherever it chooses to. And when you're open to that, then I think you can be really surprised by what's gifted to you visually. So I've been really enjoying that change in the process of making long form stories. So in this case, originally the work was looking just at the American landscape and kind of like the death of the American dream on a micro level, in the sense of like you had these main streets and you had these industrial era where these towns were prospering, and then once that rug was pulled out from under them, this is kind of what remains. And to me, it's a smaller version of kind of potentially what's happening to the US in general, but on a smaller scale. We've been building these massive malls, and we've been building all these massive infrastructure, and when times were much better, but now, socially, economically, I feel like, we need to pause and kind of contemplate what direction we want to take our use of land and the environment. So that's kind of where it began. But then after I went through this edit with the publisher, Matt Eich, and with my good friend, Ty Wright, and we kind of narrowed it down. But then my wife, I brought it to my wife, and she's like, called me out. She's just like, she's like, this is cool, it's about American dream. I get it, but like, so what? And she's like, where are you in the story? Like, what's it about? Like, I mean, so yeah, American dream, things are, dying. I get it. But again, like, where are you? Where's the you in this project? And I was like, oh man, I hate showing you my stuff. Because she always makes me start over. No, I don't hate to do it, but I'm always nervous. I'm always nervous to show it to her.
Yeah. That's a core shaking, challenging question.
Yeah. But she's always on point. I'll give her that. Like, just asking the hard questions, and then I pause, and she goes, what about your native roots? You're indigenous. Like, how does this affect that community or that culture? Or like, and then I start, and at the time, while working on Black Diamonds and also shooting some of these photos for Little Cities, I was seeing a lot of native themes that kept popping up in my head that could be photographs. But I would drive past them because I was like, well, there's something there, but I don't know what it is. I don't know I don't know if I'm going to save that for some other concept or project. So I kind of just put them on the back burner, just took note of where they were, and think I'll come back and photograph that if I decide to do something more related to like indigenous culture. But when my wife asked me about where was I in this project, then that's when the light bulb went off, and she's like, what about the mounds, in the area, and what about, started naming some different things. And so I went out and photographed a few different things that I'd seen in the past that I mentioned. But when I started photographing the mounds and reading more about them, it just felt right. So throughout the book, you'll see there's going to be a lot of, the majority of it is like post-industrial main streets and the region, but then there'll be like punctuations of these Indian mounds that kind of act as like a pause, so that you can just stop and contemplate where their role lies in the bigger picture. And then also looking at like how the natives use land versus how contemporary society uses land today. And that's not to say that natives were not using the land in a way that was destructive as well. There certainly were harvesting and clear cutting trees and so forth, but it's just posing the question, you know, and also asking questions about if we have these beautiful Indian mounds that were burial grounds. Like, I'll get to this other picture soon where it's like there's houses just built around them, and like what role does this play in our society? And are native folks invisible, or are they respected, or, you know? So there's all these different questions that I'm asking myself and thinking about it. So those are kind of all falling into this project. And like, so then this is just kind of like a subtlety looking at, you know, again, these former coal towns and what they brought and the conditions they're in today. And the thing is, the goal is like not necessarily to point fingers at anyone, saying like, you know, oh, you're doing this one way or you're doing it like the natives or indigenous folks, you know, were these holy people who, you know, walked on water kind of thing. But it's really just to kind of, you know, promote the question of like, this is the legacy they've left behind, you know, and then you go back to, you know, and then this is a legacy we're leaving behind, you know. And so it's kind of like, where do we want to go as a society? Like, how do we want to treat our lands, and how do we want to respect those who came before us? Because even myself, like when I first relocated to this region, I rented a room from a friend of mine, because my family didn't come first. I came first until I could find a house and get everything set up so that they could come, you know, with everything prepared. And when I remember I moved in, he's like, "Oh yeah, check it out. There's an Indian mound right there in my yard." And it didn't really register. I didn't know what an Indian mound was. I didn't know what it represented. But literally, like, my room was like just a few yards from the Indian mound, which that mound has actually made the final edit for this book, but it's not in this edit. I kind of hiding that one. That's going to be a nice little surprise for other people. But that's a story behind that particular, you know, because I wanted to share with people that, like, again, like I don't want to point the finger or you know, put blame on anyone, but, you know, I want to admittedly, like, I lacked knowledge of what the significance of these mounds were in this region. And I lived next to one, I slept next to one, unknowingly, not aware of like what it meant and what does it mean today. You know, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to others? So I just kind of continue trying to pose that. But again, like, here's the one photo with a mound with like homes all built around it, and it just kind
Quite
of
striking the way it stands out, and you know, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you see that, you're like, wait. And you know, so it's just trying to bring awareness and strike up this conversation, like, where are we going? What do we want? And I'll stop on this one because it doesn't matter like where I go in the world, whether I'm in the US or if I'm abroad. And I think people can connect with this, is that I don't understand what the fascination is. I'm assuming a man did this, or a boy, or male, but no matter where I travel, people love to do graffiti of penises.
Something we share as a world, as a international community.
Yeah, you know, it's like this primal urge to illustrate your penis. I don't know. But it did make the edit, and when you see it within the sequence, it has more context of why it's in there. But yeah, you know, you'll have to see the book, and then you'll hopefully it'll make sense and why it's there. So, and then you know, not everything in little cities is like strictly, you know, a landscape of a building and what have you, but this particular detail is really it looks beautiful. Like, looks like the lakes or the creek is really inviting, but it's actually a result of acid mine drainage. So you have two different colors. One color will be like a rusted red, which is from acid mine drainage, and then you'll have this blue like color like this that looks like clean water, but it's actually the aluminum runoff that has like created that beautiful blue. And again, that just brings back questions of like, you know, what are we doing with our land and how do we want to move forward? And then here's another, this particular mound is been set aside as a park, which is interesting, but I'm still kind of like, I still don't really know how that sits with me. I'm not sure. And then it just ends on, this one frame that you're familiar with, but it's just like minerals and land use. So
Yeah.
that's the end of that one. So
Yeah. Thank you. One of the things I wanted to follow up with you about is then this sort of cultural journey, this cultural explanation where you were exploring your community. You mentioned that your wife's name is
Jasmine.
Yasmin.
Yeah.
Yasmin asked, where are you in these pictures when it came to the little cities work as
Mhm.
well? This idea of the indigenous American, and these hills you were talking about, these burial mounds, right?
Yep.
Right. Are those kind of markers in a sense for where you connected? Also, you connected you in the pictures.
Yeah, I think for sure. And it's been coming up as Filipino and Indigenous Mexican, there's always been this identity crisis where oh, you're not this, you're not that, like what are you, where do you find your place? So again, it's just like another opportunity to kind of learn something that photography has provided for me, is like to learn not only about others but also to learn about myself and defining myself and my identity.
Yeah. Um, the other thing that came up when you were showing your work, and for those of you who are listening now on just the podcast part of it, you can go watch the video and see the work. You mentioned that you were going to leave it up to people to sort of to their imagination in little cities, less so about explaining that these are burial mounds or that the blue in the water was caused by aluminum, but you wanted to sort of have these images go beyond a place and be more representative of this broader idea of what we do to the landscape, how we live in this world, and what we kind of leave behind, right?
Yes, for
Um,
sure.
I was thinking about a question I asked earlier with you coming from this photojournalism background and doing this documentary work. Is this do you think a real intentional break from that photojournalism background? Like really
Yeah, I
how to
mean,
work
like
differently?
for sure. I mean, it's just been an opportunity to kind of, when you're working as a journalist, there's obviously different approach as far as like keeping your voice or your opinion out of the work. Um, and that's arguable, can you really be objective? But do your best to be objective. And then and also, you're working with the writer and you're trying to collaborate with each other in order to tell this narrative that may educate folks or put light on a subject that's been hidden. But in um, but with Little Cities and with Black Diamonds, it's given me the opportunity to kind of explore and put my own voice into the work and to talk and to specifically address or photograph topics that are compelling and meaningful to me, and to actually be able to voice my opinion about those topics and not hide behind well, not say hide behind being a journalist, but not have the responsibility of having an objective opinion about
Mhm.
something. It's so that's been definitely a welcoming opportunity.
Right, right. When it's just sort of trying to describe facts and um thinking about just showing things in the moment, you do shield yourself, you protect yourself from the sort of the bigger ideas, right? The what's like your wife Jasmine said, like, where am I in these pictures, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But what's nice though is there has been crossover now. Like when I went to do this work for ProPublica a couple of weeks ago, or last week or a week, I can't remember, a couple of weeks ago maybe, and we had the opportunity to now approach the subject matter in the same way in which I photographed Black Diamonds in Little Cities. The editor was like, you think you'd be a great fit for this because it's a similar topic. I can't get into exactly the specifics because it hasn't published yet, but I did have the opportunity to now apply this personal aesthetic that I created for my current work, and now apply that to the editorial work that I'm doing for other people. So that's been a nice outcome.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for all this time, and thank everyone for joining the first Photo Show Live podcast. And Rich, it's been such a pleasure to talk about you and your work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me come on, and it's nice to finally put a face to the voice that I've been listening to with the other podcasts. So.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so nice. Well, thank you all, and I guess we'll be in touch, right? Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right.